Peace and blessings, family. We acknowledge the ancestors who risked their lives to read, who taught in secret, who built schools in the shadow of systems designed to keep them ignorant. Their resistance was not sentimental, it was strategic. We acknowledge you, the strategic community, for showing up with intention and choosing sovereignty over survival. Welcome to the first strategic briefing of Educational Sovereignty Month. I am Naomi. This is the Black Metrics. CarterGWoodson warned in 1933 that when you control a man's thinking, you do not have to worry about his actions. That warning is not history. It is the operating system of modern education. There is a question that does not get asked often enough about education. Not what school should my child attend, not what degree will get the best salary, not how do we close the achievement gap. The question that changes everything is this: what is education actually for? For most Black families across the diaspora, the answer that was handed down was simple. Get the grades, get the degree, get the job. And it produced educated, capable, skilled people. But it did not produce institutional builders. It did not produce sovereign thinkers. And it did not produce the infrastructure of collective power. Consider Destiny. She grew up in Bronzeville on the south side of Chicago. Her grandmother was a school principal for 32 years. Her mother was a teacher for 20. By 2024, Destiny held a doctorate and sat in meetings deciding what hundreds of thousands of Black children would learn. And she realized something that took 20 years of exceptional academic achievement to fully understand. She had mastered a system she had never been taught to question. That is the difference between training and education. And that difference is what this series is about. When enslaved Africans were forbidden to read, it was not because reading was dangerous in itself. It was because knowledge produces independent thought, and independent thought produces independent action. The literacy ban was not a cultural preference. It was a strategic decision made by people who understood that a literate population cannot be governed by deception alone. They needed their subjects to remain dependent on others to interpret legal documents, financial agreements, political processes, and historical records. Literacy was the infrastructure of self-determination, and that infrastructure had to be destroyed before sovereignty could be permanently suppressed. Education has never been neutral. It has always been about control. The question is only who is doing the controlling and toward what end. There is a difference between training and education that most systems never teach you to see. Training answers the question, what do I do? Education answers the question, why does it matter and who benefits? A trained mind executes within a system. An educated mind evaluates the system itself. Modern education systems often present themselves as neutral pathways to success. The language of meritocracy, equal opportunity, and academic excellence obscures a structural reality. These systems were designed within specific ideological frameworks that serve specific interests. Students are trained to follow instructions rather than question systems. They are taught to memorize information rather than apply it. They are prepared to participate in an existing structure, not to redesign it. The curriculum tells them what to think. Educational sovereignty teaches them how to think, and for whose benefit that thinking is directed. We do not have to speculate about what sovereignty-oriented education produces. We have a documented model. The Freedom Schools of the 1964 Mississippi Freedom Summer were not supplemental programs. They were fully formed educational institutions built from the ground up by Black educators with a singular mandate: produce thinkers who understand their own history, their own rights, and their own power. The curriculum was not designed to produce good employees. It was designed to produce citizens capable of dismantling structures that denied them citizenship in the first place. The Freedom Schools produced measurably different graduates, not just academically stronger students, strategically capable people who went on to build institutions, run campaigns, and shape policy. That is the difference a sovereign curriculum makes. Not just what students learn, but what students become capable of doing with what they know. Woodson's most precise observation was not about literacy laws or school curriculum. It was about something more difficult to see and harder to dismantle. He observed that the most effective form of oppression is the kind that its subjects administer themselves. When a person has been taught to see themselves as a subject of history, rather than an architect of it, they will behave accordingly. No external enforcement required. The psychological dimension of the educational trap is this: It does not feel like a trap. It feels like aspiration. It feels like achievement. It is celebrated at graduations. It is framed as progress. But if the framework for what counts as success was designed by those who needed you compliant, then mastering that framework is not freedom. It is a more sophisticated form of captivity. Educational sovereignty begins the moment a community decides to define success on its own terms. Educational sovereignty is not a return to the past. It is a strategic infrastructure decision about the future. It requires three things that most reform movements skip entirely. First, it requires controlling the framework through which knowledge is organized. Not just adding Black history to an existing curriculum. Building a curriculum where African and diaspora intellectual traditions are the foundation, not the footnote. Second, it requires controlling the institutions through which that knowledge is transmitted. Historically Black colleges and universities, independent schools, community learning centers, and digital academies that are owned by and accountable to Black communities, not external boards or funding bodies with competing interests. Third, it requires connecting those institutions into a coordinated ecosystem, not a collection of isolated efforts. Sovereign education at scale requires a network, not just a school. The blueprint for building that network is what Volume 4 of the Sovereignty series is built around. Education as a battlefield is not a metaphor. It is a documented historical reality that continues to shape what our children learn, who controls that learning, and what kind of people that learning is designed to produce. Woodson warned us. The Freedom Schools demonstrated the alternative, and we have all the evidence we need to make a different decision. The question is no longer whether this is true. The question is what we choose to build next. Educational Sovereignty, Volume 4 of the Sovereignty series is available now at blackmetrics.space. 10 chapters covering the full blueprint, curriculum design, independent learning ecosystems, community funding models, global diaspora networks, and a 25-point strategic assessment checklist you can apply to your institution today. I am Naomi. This is the Black Metrics. From data to destiny, the mind must be free before anything else can follow.